December 13th, 1945. 9:34 a.m. Hameln Prison, Germany. The heavy steel door of the execution chamber swings open. Irma Grese enters. She is 22 years old, blonde hair, neatly styled. A clean prison dress. Blue eyes scan the room. She looks at the British military officer. She looks at the wooden gallows. The rope hangs from the beam. Grese looks at the noose and smiles. Executioner Albert Pierpoint waits. He has already calculated the drop. The rope length correlates to her body weight. The goal, an instantaneous fracture of the cervical vertebrae. A clean, bureaucratic snap. To reach this point at 9:34, it took 8 years of systemic indoctrination. Grese steps onto the trapdoor. The air is cold. The scent of her expensive French perfume has long since faded, replaced by the smell of damp stone and hemp. The leather hood slides over her head. The noose tightens against her skin. A sharp, metallic click. The trapdoor collapses. The youngest woman executed under British law in the 20th century falls. The rope jerks. The body stops twitching. The process of production began on October 7, 1923. Rechen, Mecklenburg, 50 miles north of Berlin. Irma Ilse Grese was the third of 5 children. Her father, Alfred, worked as a dairy laborer. Her mother, Bertha, tended the family garden. For 13 years, the biography followed a standard agrarian pattern. The trajectory shifted in 1936. Bertha discovered Alfred's affair with a local woman. She chose a lethal exit. She drank hydrochloric acid. Irma found the body and watched the prolonged agony of a caustic death. 1 year later, Alfred joined the Nazi Party. Why did a laborer's daughter choose the SS? Irma's lack of nursing qualifications closed standard social elevators. She failed her apprenticeship. In 1938, she dropped out of school at age 15 due to poor grades and chronic bullying. The system provided a replacement for the collapsed family structure. Membership in the BDM, the League of German Girls, became mandatory for 98% of German girls by 1939. Irma did not merely join, she synchronized. She attended every rally. She mastered the lexicon of Aryan supremacy and the Jewish threat. While Alfred joined the party for job security, Irma became a true believer. Between 1938 and 1942, she drifted. 6 months on a farm, 6 months in a shop, 2 years as an assistant in an SS sanatorium. In 1942, the Labor Exchange issued a mandatory assignment. The Labor Exchange issued a new directive in 1942. The destination was Ravensbrück concentration camp. At her later trial, she claimed she protested. She insisted she tried to return to nursing school. The archives show no evidence of this. No written refusal exists. No record of dissent. Could she have walked away? SS protocols allowed for a simple transfer. Women who refused camp duty were reassigned to factories. They were not executed. They were not imprisoned. Irma Grese accepted the post. In July 1942, at age 18, she arrived at the training grounds. Ravensbrück served as the primary instructional center for female guards. The curriculum was precise. The training lasted from 3 weeks to 3 months, depending on the current personnel deficit. Grese studied the camp hierarchy. She mastered the methods of suppression. The instructors taught a single core discipline. The prisoners were not human. They were enemies of the Reich. They were criminals and asocials. The state provided the tools of the trade, a uniform, a whip, absolute authority. Irma adapted to the system with mechanical efficiency. She discovered a natural aptitude for the work. She preferred heavy leather boots. She enjoyed the sound of the whip. By March 1943, the 18-year-old trainee received a promotion and a transfer to Auschwitz-Birkenau. Auschwitz-Birkenau received a new officer in March 1943. The 19-year-old stepped into the largest extermination facility of the Third Reich. Over 1 million people died in these gas chambers. Here, Irma Grese found her true vocation. How did a factory girl achieve such rapid status? Her career trajectory outpaced veterans. By autumn 1943, the 20-year-old became an Oberaufseherin. This was the second highest female rank in the camp. Grese earned 180 Reichsmarks. It was triple the wage of a standard factory worker. She was no longer a trainee. She was a senior supervisor. Grese transformed the camp into a runway. She ordered tailored uniforms from prisoner seamstresses. The fabric came from the luggage of the dead. Her boots shone. Her hair was perfectly styled for hours. Witness Gisela Pearl described her face as having angelic clarity. Her blue eyes appeared innocent. It was a calculated aesthetic of power. Grese used expensive French perfumes. She walked through the mud and the stench of the crematoria. The contrast was a weapon. The heavy scent of floral notes cut through the smell of decaying bodies and unwashed thousands. For the prisoners, the perfume was psychological torture. It reminded them of a world that no longer existed. A world of homes, families, and dignity. Grese moved like a fashion model through a landscape of skeletons. Resources for this image were limitless. The Canada warehouses held the confiscated property of every incoming transport. Grese chose the best silks and the finest scents from the belongings of those she sent to the ovens. At 20 years old, she held absolute power over 30,000 women. Grese modified her standard-issue uniform with 3 specific tools of enforcement. She never appeared without heavy leather boots, a custom braided whip, and a Luger pistol. These were not symbols of rank. They were functional instruments for the management of the camp population. Witness testimonies from survivors like Ilona Stein and Daniel Schafran describe a calculated sequence of violence. The whip was for the face and breasts. The boots were for the ribs and head of those who fell. Grese also utilized a half-starved German shepherd as a kinetic weapon. She would release the animal on prisoners and observe as it tore muscle from the bone. The sound of the braided whip striking human flesh became a rhythmic element of camp life. Ilona Stein recalled an incident in 1943 at the Birkenau kitchen. A woman attempted to speak to her daughter through the wire fence. Grese dismounted her bicycle, removed her leather belt, and struck the woman until her face turned blue. When mechanical violence failed to ensure order, Grese utilized her firearm. During a selection process for the gas chambers, 2 Polish girls attempted to escape by jumping through a window. They lay on the ground, injured from the fall. Grese walked to the screaming girls and fired 2 shots into their heads. The most effective instrument of destruction was not the pistol, it was the index finger. Grese transformed the selection process into a high-speed algorithm for sorting biomass. Every few weeks, the SS medical staff conducted formal selections. Grese integrated herself into the technical routine with precision. She walked through the barracks. She examined the women like livestock. The process followed a strict mechanical sequence. Grese wore a black leather glove. She pointed at a prisoner. The finger moved. The number was recorded. The woman moved to the left. The flow of the line never stopped. What was the selection criteria? It was any deviation from the standard or a perceived threat to her ego. Grese ignored the official health protocols. She selected the sick. She selected the healthy. She targeted pregnant women and those who simply annoyed her. Personal competition became a death sentence. According to Olga Lengel, Grese specifically filtered out women who retained traces of their former beauty. It was a tactical elimination of rivals. The throughput of the Birkenau crematoria reached 4,756 bodies per day. Grese ensured the machines stayed fed. While overseeing a punishment detail, her personal quota remained consistent: 30 prisoners every day, 6,000 victims in 7 months. The victims realized the destination. They began to scream. Grese stood by the trucks and hummed Nazi songs. Ultimate power over life and death evolved into a refined pathology of sexual deviance. The camp hierarchy provided total impunity for acts that the regime officially classified as Rassenschande, racial defilement. Legally, sexual contact with prisoners carried a death sentence for SS personnel. In practice, the administration ignored these violations within the perimeter of Auschwitz. Witness Olga Lengel documented the systematic nature of this abuse. It was not a matter of desire, but a mechanism of absolute domination. Irma Grese utilized her position to strip victims of their final shred of autonomy. Her maid, a prisoner herself, confirmed the frequency of these encounters. The testimony described a pattern of sadistic interactions with Jewish women. Grese sought total ownership of the human object. The advance of the Red Army in January 1945 terminated the Auschwitz phase of her career. The SS began a chaotic evacuation. Thousands of prisoners commenced death marches toward the west. Grese avoided the front lines. The command ordered her immediate transfer to Ravensbrück. The design capacity of Bergen-Belsen was 10,000 prisoners. By March 1945, 60,000 people were crammed inside. The logistics of the camp collapsed. Supply lines vanished. There was no food, no water, and zero sanitation. Typhus transformed the barracks into a mass grave. Why did she remain in this diseased hell instead of retreating with the collapsing front? The reason was Franz Hassler. He was a married SS officer 14 years her senior. Grese called him Hachi. While hundreds died every hour, she focused on their affair. Witnesses later testified that the two regularly slipped away for secret sexual encounters. In Bergen-Belsen, Irma continued her work. 2 weeks before the end, she was seen nearly beating a girl to death with a riding crop. Outside the barracks, mountains of uncollected corpses rotted against the backdrop of the spring forest. On April 15, 1945, the British 11th Armored Division reached the gates. Brigadier Bob Daniel attempted to enter a hut when he felt a cold barrel against his spine. He turned. Irma Grese stood there, immaculate and well-dressed. She held a pistol in one hand and a German shepherd on a leash in the other. Daniel shouted. Grese fled. The British did not arrest the female guards immediately. They handed them shovels and ropes. 10,000 corpses lay scattered across the campgrounds. The sun accelerated the decay. Photographers captured the images, the beautiful beast dragging skeletal remains to mass graves. The British military police finally terminated her freedom and placed her under formal arrest. The Belsen trial opened in Lüneburg on September 17, 1945. It marked a legal milestone. For the first time, the British military applied international law to concentration camp personnel within their occupation zone. 45 defendants occupied the dock. Among them were Commandant Joseph Kramer, physician Fritz Klein, and 3 female guards. Irma Grese was defendant number 9. A white placard with the digit hung from her neck. The prosecution presented 2 distinct indictments: war crimes at Bergen-Belsen and war crimes at Auschwitz. The list of offenses was extensive: torture, arbitrary shootings, selection for gas chambers, setting dogs on inmates, beatings with leather whips. The trial lasted 54 days. Survivors took the witness stand one by one. They identified Grese. They pointed at her and testified. One woman spoke of her mother being selected for the gas chamber. Another recounted a friend's execution. Some witnesses broke down in tears. Others spoke with a cold, controlled fury. Grese remained stone-faced. She focused on her appearance. Every morning she styled her hair differently. She wanted to look her best for her lover, Franz Hatzinger. She was unaware of his death from typhus on April 23rd. She dressed for a dead man. The prosecution screened films of the camps. The footage showed Bergen-Belsen and Auschwitz in 1945. Corpses were piled like cordwood. Mass graves overflowed. Skeletal survivors stared at the lens. Grese watched the screen without blinking. She displayed no emotion during the entire presentation. The strategy of the defense rested on a single pillar: the superior order's plea. Irma Grese maintained she was a cog in a machine, a subordinate with no agency. The prosecution dismantled this facade with a single legal instrument. According to Article 8 of the London Charter, following orders did not absolve a defendant of criminal responsibility. Was there any chance for acquittal? The record proved otherwise. The prosecution presented evidence that the Nazi system rarely punished guards for refusing to participate in executions. Those who objected were simply reassigned. Grese chose to stay. The interrogation turned to the whip. The prosecutor's voice was steady. Grese's response was arrogant. She admitted to carrying the weapon at Auschwitz. "It was a very light whip," she stated, "but if I hit someone, it would hurt." This admission was a fatal tactical error. She confirmed she used the whip even after Commandant Joseph Kramer prohibited it. By her own words, her cruelty was not an order, it was a personal initiative. The court then addressed the gas chambers. Grese claimed she only learned of them from prisoners. She denied ever conducting selections. The witness stand told a different story. One survivor after another identified Grese. They described her standing on the ramp. They saw her finger pointing toward the chimneys. She denied the testimony. Her eyes remained cold. The emotional vacuum broke only once. Her sister, Helene, took the stand. The sound of Helene's sobbing filled the quiet courtroom. Helene recounted a visit in 1943. Irma had returned home in her SS uniform. She was proud. The sister described a scene of inexplicable malice. Irma had taken a doll belonging to Helene's young daughter. She methodically tore off its head and limbs. Later, her father, Alfred, intervened. His young son had playfully aimed Irma's service pistol at him. Alfred seized the weapon and struck Irma. A violent argument followed. Alfred Grese had never supported his daughter's career in the SS. For the first and only time in 54 days, the Beast of Belsen collapsed. She sat in the dock, sobbing into her hands. The moment of humanity was brief. It did not change the mechanical progression of the law. Grese had admitted to using a light whip of her own volition. On November 17, 1945, the court reached its verdict. The verdict arrived on November 17, 1945. 30 defendants were found guilty, 14 walked free. One was too ill to face the bench. The court handed down 11 death sentences and 19 prison terms. Was there any chance of leniency? Article 8 of the Nuremberg Charter had already closed that door. Superior orders were no defense. Irma Grese faced the court. Guilty on both counts. Sentence, death by hanging. Alongside her stood Joseph Kramer, Fritz Klein, Elizabeth Volkenrath, and Wanne Bormann. All condemned. Grese remained motionless. No flinch, no tears. She maintained the same calculated composure she held in the camps. The transfer to Hameln prison followed immediately. In her cell, the 22-year-old focused on her image. She wrote letters. She styled her hair. She acted as if the bars were merely a temporary inconvenience. On the final night, the silence of the wing broke. Guards heard singing. Grese was shouting Nazi anthems into the stone walls. Defiant, arrogant, she spent her last hours praising German supremacy. On the morning of December 13, 1945, the executioner arrived. Pierpoint had traveled from London to Hamelin prison specifically for this task. 11 executions were scheduled for December 13, 1945. The protocol was strict. 3 women would go first, followed by 8 men in pairs. Irma Grese exited her cell at 9:34 a.m. She did not struggle. She did not pray. Instead, she walked toward the gallows laughing. To the executioner, she appeared as a healthy, ordinary girl. This was the hyena of Auschwitz. Regimental Sergeant Major O'Neill began the final interrogation. When asked for her age, Grese paused. She smiled at the officers. For a moment, the room shared a bizarre, silent irony regarding a woman's vanity. She stated she was 21. Official records confirmed she was 22. Even seconds from the noose, she chose a lie. Why was her weight the most critical factor? Precision was the only priority for a professional like Pierpoint. He ordered Grese to step onto the scales. The math dictated the drop. If the rope was too short, she would strangle for minutes. If it was too long, the force would decapitate her. Pierpoint calculated the distance to ensure a clean fracture of the vertebrae. "Follow me," Pierpoint said. O'Neill translated the command into German. Grese entered the execution chamber without assistance. She surveyed the room. She looked at the British officers standing at attention. She looked at the wooden beam. Grese stepped onto the center of the trapdoor. She remained calm. Pierpoint pulled a white hood over her head and adjusted the noose. He positioned the heavy glass silk knot behind her left ear to ensure the neck snapped instantly. He stepped back and engaged the lever. The trapdoor collapsed. The rope snapped taut with the weight of her body. There was no struggle. The drop broke her neck immediately. Total elapsed time from the cell to the drop was 54 seconds. Execution efficiency was absolute. 12 seconds passed from the moment Elizabeth Volkenrath entered the chamber until the trapdoor fell. Pierpoint maintained his rhythm. Juana Bormann followed. Then came the men, led to the gallows, 2 at a time. By 10:38 in the morning, 11 bodies hung in the silence of Hamlin Prison. The British military authorities allowed the corpses to hang for 60 minutes. Why such a precise delay? Standard procedure ensured clinical certainty of death. Soldiers eventually cut the ropes. They placed the remains into plain wooden coffins. No names appeared on the lids, only numbers. The prison cemetery received the dead in unmarked graves. There was no ceremony. No family members attended. No markers indicated where the hyena of Auschwitz lay. Irma Grese was 22 years old. She remains the youngest woman executed under British law in the 20th century. Contrast defined her existence. She was not born a predator, but a daughter of a dairy worker. In 1938, she was a failing student with dreams of becoming a nurse. By 1943, she was a sadist who selected thousands for the gas chambers. The transition from an ordinary girl to a concentration camp guard took less than 3 years. Records show her father joined the Nazi Party only in 1937. Irma exceeded his fanaticism within months. She beat prisoners to death with a celluloid whip. She wore heavy boots to kick her victims. She found pleasure in the screams. The British buried the coffins in the prison courtyard. Hannah Arendt formulated a chilling concept, the banality of evil. It suggests that genocide is not the work of supernatural monsters. Instead, it is the result of ordinary people making specific choices. Irma Grese serves as the ultimate case study for this theory. She suffered from no diagnosed psychosis. She was not legally insane. How does a normal person transform into a predator? The process began when the state granted her absolute permission. Power acted as a catalyst. Grese functioned within a system that categorized her victims as subhuman. She did not just obey the rules, she thrived. She volunteered for the selection ramps. Most guards viewed this as a duty. Grese viewed it as an opportunity. She beat prisoners who followed every order. She invented reasons for cruelty. The suffering of others provided her with visible satisfaction. Grese frequently bypassed the required protocols for execution. Why wait for orders? She set trained dogs on defenseless inmates. She used her pistol to shoot prisoners for personal amusement. In 1945, the British captured her at Bergen-Belsen. She showed no remorse during the entire trial. The night before the execution, she sang Nazi anthems in her cell. She laughed while walking toward the gallows. Her defense rested on 2 pillars: her youth and the claim of following orders. The court rejected both. Grese held the power of choice at every turn. She chose the whip and the pistol. On December 13, 1945, the trapdoor opened. Irma Grese was 22 years old. Justice at the gallows was the exception. Irma Grese died at 22. 3,700 women served as concentration camp guards. Most faced no trial. Most never saw a cell. They returned home to a shattered Germany. They changed names. They married. They raised children and died in their beds of old age. Grese was an anomaly because she stayed. British troops entered Bergen-Belsen in April 1945. Irma stood her ground. She pointed a pistol at a British officer. It was a fatal tactical error. Survivors recognized her face and her whip. The law caught her, tried her, and broke her neck. Did the others simply disappear? Thousands of guards committed identical acts. They beat prisoners. They conducted selections for the gas chambers. They operated the machinery of death for years, not months. Yet the archives are silent on their names. The West German judiciary prosecuted only a fraction of camp personnel. For every Irma Grese, hundreds of women escaped into the mundanity of post-war life. They became grandmothers. They lived in the same towns as their victims' surviving relatives. The victims cannot demand an accounting. Their remains fill the mass graves of Bergen-Belsen. They exist only as ash from the Auschwitz crematoriums. History recorded the execution of a 22-year-old girl. It forgot the thousands of others who walked away. British records confirm only 10% of captured SS personnel ever faced a courtroom. But legal statistics fail to capture the visceral reality of the camps. Mass graves at Bergen-Belsen remained. The crematoriums at Auschwitz stood as iron evidence. Why does the specific cruelty of one guard remain documented? Irma Grese was not a high-ranking architect of the final solution. She was a 22-year-old woman. Between 1942 and 1945, she transformed from a dairy farm assistant into the Beast of Belsen. She did not merely follow orders, she innovated in her cruelty. Grese selected prisoners for the gas chambers with a visible smile. She used heavy jackboots to break ribs. She carried a custom whip made of cellophane and leather. When the beatings became tiring, she set trained guard dogs on the women. Her victims were not statistics to her. They were targets for a sadism that required no provocation. Did she ever show regret for the thousands she sent to the gas? On December 13, 1945, she faced the gallows. She did not pray. She did not ask for mercy. Grese walked to the executioner laughing. She sang. She died defiant. The drop occurred. Her neck snapped. The process took 12 seconds. By 1946, the cell she occupied was empty. The world was slightly better. The truth remains that a 22-year-old girl took thousands of lives for her own pleasure. The gallows ended the crimes, but not the necessity of the record. Memory is the only barrier against sanitized history. We name the perpetrators to honor the victims. Every woman she beat, every prisoner she selected, every life she destroyed. The rope tightened at 10:34 in the morning.